Well, good morning, everyone. Um, it's here in Idaho. It is 9 a.m. And I had debated whether to come on this morning or not, since we're giving a Pure and Pandemic 2 this afternoon. But then I decided there was something I wanted to talk about, and I thought some of you might like to join me. So, good morning, and my question today, and really it's a question I'm asking myself, is are you comfortable in your own skin? And this is actually a big question to ask myself. And the reason this came up for me, and hi Anne, thanks for joining me. The reason this came up for me this morning, I'm in a coaching group that I take part in every couple of weeks, and it was at 6:30 a.m. this morning, which is very early for me. And but at the end of the group, he asked us a question, and we started talking about this concept of being comfortable in your own skin. Hi, Shrep and Maria, and hi everybody. Thanks for joining me. I'm in a coaching group because I'm a life coach, and one of the best ways to learn how to coach is to be coached. But I am a life coach. If any of you ever want life coaching, I coach in the areas of spiritual recovery and creative recovery, and also healing trauma. And I also do some business coaching. So anyways, I was in this group this morning, and we were talking about, he asked this question, and he said, are you in your own corner? In other words, are you fighting for you? Are you comfortable in your own skin? Are you in your own corner cheering for yourself? And that really resonated with me because with the pandemic, Dave and I are changing the way we do ministry, and we're online a lot, and it's been a big change for my introvert self. And we've made some major things have happened. Some really exciting things have happened, but I realized I don't do that very good. I don't get in my own corner and root for me. And I'm not always comfortable in my own skin. And I wonder if any of you relate. Yeah, 6:30 a.m. is early. You're right, Maria. Yeah, it's been an early morning for me and a big day since we're doing Pure and Pandemic 2 today. But he was talking about this idea of elastic love. I don't know if you guys have ever heard that before. But the idea, it's like loving your children, that your love is elastic in that it can expand to accommodate their weaknesses, their flaws, they forgot to let the dog out and the dog peed in the house, or they didn't do the dishes, or they threw their clothes all over the place. That elastic love is that our love has got a springiness to it, that it stretches, and it's big enough for that. And actually what makes your kids feel loved is that they know that that love is elastic. Well, hi Stacy, and hi Karen, Mark, Jennifer, thanks everybody for joining me this morning. We're talking about, are you comfortable in your own skin? Hi Bobby. I could just sit here and say hi to everybody the whole time. Are you comfortable in your own skin? And that idea of elastic love is that our love needs a springiness in it. Do we have elastic love for other people that allows for their mistakes, their flaws, the things they do wrong, the ways they forget about us, that they don't call us when we long for them to call us. They don't call. They don't initiate when we're longing for someone to initiate. Does our love have that elasticity in it? And then the big question is, do I have elastic love for myself? Thank you. Do I have elastic love for myself that's got some springiness in it, that's got the capacity to accommodate my own flaws and my own mistakes and the things I do wrong? And I was listening, I was thinking about the past week, and I've had some coronavirus fog going on. I've been working really hard and working full-time right now, I guess you'd say. And I had the fog, And 3 times I set up coaching sessions with my life coach, and I messed up all 3 of them. And the first 2, it was because he's on Eastern time and I'm on Central time. And I totally wrote it down wrong in my book. And 2 times is embarrassing. And then the 3rd time, he offered another time and he said, now let's be clear, this is Eastern time. And I'm like, okay, I'm clear. But I never got back to him like I thought I did. So the next morning I got back and said, I'm in, I'll see you soon. And then it turned out he'd already filled the appointment with somebody else. So 3 times in a week I messed up my coaching appointment. And then this morning when it came to getting in the group, I felt this, I don't know. I messed up my coaching appointment 3 times this week. Can I go be in this group? Do I have anything to give? So at the end of our session, when we were talking about elastic love, man, I really felt it. Like, am I in my own corner? You know, can I count on me being in my corner, fighting for me? And sometimes I think as Christians, we don't think that's spiritual, you know, or we don't think that we should do that. But if we aren't loving ourselves, then of course, you know, the greatest command gets really tough. And the second is this is Mark 12:31. You must love your neighbor in the same way you love yourself. You will never find a greater commandment than this. Well, yes, than loving God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind, and loving your neighbor as yourself. We'll never find a greater thing to strive for than that. But this is the Passion Translation, and I had never quite read it this way. You must love your neighbor in the same way you love yourself. So the ways that I love myself translate directly into how I love other people. Have you guys found that's true? Good morning. I see LaTora and Nicole. I think it's Jassy. Forgive me if I'm saying that wrong. Michelle. Thanks everybody for joining. And we're talking about, are you comfortable in your own skin, or does shame have the last word? And I think it's too easy to give shame the last word. Our conference this afternoon, Pure in Pandemic 2, is going to be all about shame. So if you want to hear more about shame, that will be good. But I think too often I let shame come in and have the last word. Even when I am fighting for myself, even when I'm trying to be in my own corner, it's so easy to let shame come in and say, oh man, if you go in this coaching group this morning, they're all going to be like, where have you been? Because I haven't been in the last 2 group sessions, and I missed 3 coaching sessions this week that I totally messed up. And what if he brings that up to the whole group and talks to me about it in front of them? And so this is really resonating with me this morning, this idea. You must love your neighbor in the same way you love yourself. And being secure in your own skin. I think the pandemic is teaching us not to trust our own skin, isn't it? It's like skin is germs. Skin might be coronavirus. Wear gloves before you touch anything. Skin should be scrubbed. You know, I asked my husband and son if they go to the store, did you wash your hands? Did you disinfect the groceries? And so it can get us where we start to distrust our skin. And that would hurt us in so many ways. And it just so happened that I'm reading this book that my good friend Katrina felt like I needed to read. And she was absolutely right that I needed to read. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's called Fearfully and Wonderfully Made. It's by Brandon Yancey. And wow, what an amazing book. And they're using experiences in India with leprosy to talk about the body and how it applies to spirituality, how it applies to the body of Christ. It is one flat amazing book. And for those of you who are just joining us, we're talking about, are you comfortable in your own skin, or does shame have the final word? And let me tell you, too often I have let shame have the final word. You know, shame will be what's left in my ear. When all is said and done, shame will be there trying to tell me who I am and tell me who I'm not and get me to buy into that. So I've been reading this book, Fearfully and Wonderfully Made by Brand and Yancey. I'm sure you've heard of Philip Yancey. Hi, Stan. I'm sure you've heard of Philip Yancey. And he's talking about, I just read this chapter on skin. When you know, I read that right before we talked about this elastic love in my coaching group this morning. Of course, I just read a book, a chapter on skin. But he talks about an anthropologist, Ashley Montague, and Ashley is a guy. Ashley wrote a book called Touching, and he found out that animals cannot thrive. They need skin just as much as we do. They need physical touch. If you have a cat or a dog, I think you see this, right? That animals need physical touch. But and it was really something like in hospitals, they found out that just having an elderly woman come in who holds the babies who aren't thriving can totally change the course of their healing. We need touch. But listen to this. This kind of blew my mind. Montague concluded that skin ranks highest among the sense organs, higher even than the eyes or ears. So skin ranks highest, even on the way we perceive the world, even above eyes and ears. Wow. In addition to conveying information about the outside world, skin also perceives basic emotions. Did you know that? Skin perceives emotion. And wow, when we're talking about this question, am I secure in my own skin? Skin perceives basic emotions. Am I loved and accepted? Is the world secure or hostile? The skin osmotically absorbs that primal assurance. Wow. In other words, our skin is not just, it's miraculous because, when I pick up my chai here, my skin automatically adapts to whatever I'm picking up and applies just the right amount of pressure. And it's amazing if you read all the inner workings of how God created our hands to do that. If I pick up an egg, I don't put too much pressure. Whatever you pick up, the skin flexes to it. But the skin also perceives whether we are loved and accepted. Now that tells you a lot, I think, about coronavirus and why it's a struggle, right? Are you guys like me, kind of dying from the lack of, being with your friends and hugging them and feeling, a hand on your shoulder, shaking hands with somebody that you meet, having skin on skin contact. And if you live alone, it could even be more of an issue. Where is that skin on skin contact? Because that has a lot to do with whether we feel loved or accepted. And I think it also answers a question that somebody wrote on, like, what do you mean the pandemic could make us more receptive to shame? Well, here's one more answer. We don't have the skin, we don't have the amount of touching we're used to tell us that we're loved and accepted, to tell us that the world is secure. And so it's easy to start to feel like the world is hostile. Hi, Grace and Stuart, Anna, Andrea, Paul. Wow, thank you guys for joining me. So when we talk about, are you secure in your own skin, or does shame have the last word? We need our skin, and we need to keep our sensitivity. And I started thinking about this idea for those of you who are just joining us. Okay, we've got some great comments here too. Nicoletta, as followers of Jesus, our touch can reflect his showing kindness, reassurance, compassion. Let's see if I can get this on my computer so I can actually see you guys' full comments. Just one second. I'm not a very techie person, so I'm just getting used to it. Here we go. Warm and loving touch lowers anxiety and improves health. Wow, Nicoletta, you're great at pulling out those great quotes. That's Jennifer Conson. Mark, as a man with mild autism, it's hard to be in my own skin, especially since I can be sometimes picky on who I hug. Let's see if I can find the rest of yours. Hug every now and then. Thanks, Mark. Thanks for your openness. Yeah, as followers of Jesus, our touch is so important. And being secure in our own skin, I started to think this all ties together. Like we were talking, those of you who are just joining us in my coaching group this morning, our coach asked us, are you in your own corner rooting for you? And then that made me think, of course, Jesus saying to love your neighbor in the same way you love yourself. And so to be in my own corner, to me, in a way, means to be secure in my own skin. And God created us this way, that the skin is part of how we feel secure and how we feel loved. You know, and then I was thinking about this woman. So where does shame come in? And why is it so easy to shame, the last word? Let's see, Karen, I'm not big on touching and don't feel like I'm missing physical contact at all. There are those who definitely need it though. Thanks for sharing. It's one of their love languages. And I appreciate that, that some of us are more touch motivated than other people, but yet God created our skin that it's got receptors in it that help us determine whether we feel secure in this world. And sometimes I think it's the little touches. It isn't even the big touches, you know, that we need, like the touch being a love language. You know, for those of us that touch is a love language, you know, we need big touch. But it's the little touches, it's the little reassurances, somebody touching and they pass your elbow, seeing somebody at church and they just give you, you know, they pat you on the back. You know, it's those little touches, they're constantly communicating to ourselves that we're valuable. And so how does all this interact? Marcia, hi Marcia. How does all this interact with the pandemic and with shame? And I was thinking about this story in the book of, it's in different places in the New Testament. In the book of Mark and Luke, it's in Luke chapter 8. In Mark, it's in Mark chapter 5, about the woman who had the bleeding issue. And you probably remember that story, that you know, she was in a crowd and Jesus was walking by and she thought, if I can just touch him, then I'll be healed. And so she wrangled through the crowd and she reached out and touched him, and something changed in her body, and she pulled back and she was afraid because she had touched Jesus. And in that moment, I think she might have felt shame. You know, like, what have I done? I didn't even have his permission. I went and I touched Jesus, and how is he going to react? And is he going to be upset that I, an unclean woman, I, a bleeding woman, I, a woman who's not supposed to be touching anybody right now, I, a woman who's been ostracized because I have a bleeding condition and that's unclean, I, this woman, I touched Jesus. And see, here's where the shame comes in, right? That shame had been having the final word with her. And even society, you know, she was quarantined. She was on quarantine. That woman with the bleeding condition was on quarantine because she couldn't touch anybody. And if she did, she'd be sinning. You know, she'd be making them unclean. And so, you know, in a sense, Satan had the final word with her on shame. And so when even though she did it, you know, she felt compelled to get through the crowd and just touch Jesus. Now she's, you know, Jesus is like, who touched me? And she's afraid. She's afraid to tell him. And it says Jesus knew at once that someone had touched him, for he felt the power that always surged around him had passed through him for someone to be healed. Actually, it seems that she just only touched his clothing even, but he felt it. You know, he felt the touch on his clothing, through his clothing to his skin, and he turned and spoke to the crowd, "Who touched my clothing?" Now let's just look this up real quick because I want the whole thing here. And of course the disciples said, "You see the people crowding against you, and yet who you ask, who touched me?" But this is in the Passion Translation. It says, "But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it." Like, she wasn't really quick to come and just put herself forward. For those of you just joining us, we're talking about the bleeding woman that Jesus healed. And we're talking about this idea, are you secure in your own skin, or does shame have the final word? And so Jesus is looking around all over the place, and she is hesitant because shame has had the final word with her. And she's unclean, and she's had been bleeding all this time. And what if she made Jesus unclean? And what would the people think if they knew that her, an unclean woman, had pushed through them, maybe touching through some of them to get to Jesus? And, you know, think about that. You know, have you ever felt shame in this quarantine because you touched somebody? I know I have. I have, because, you know, I went and I met a neighbor, and he just reached out and shook my hand, you know, just like that. And immediately there's this sense, a little bit of shame, like, oh no, you know, he touched me, or I touched them. And it feels like a cardinal sin to touch somebody. So we can understand this bleeding woman in a whole new way, can't we? We can understand her and why she was so hesitant to tell Jesus that she was the one who touched him. Even though she didn't touch his actual skin, she touched his garment, but she wasn't even allowed that, you know, as someone who had a bleeding condition and someone who was considered unclean. And then finally, she's like, he's gonna find me out. He's not laying this down. He's gonna find me out. I know he is. And so it says she came, and she was so afraid, she was trembling. She came to him, and she was trembling, and she fell at his feet. It says she was trembling with fear. Isn't that what our shame does to us? Oh, hi, Nicole. It says, "What is this goodness I have stumbled on? Can you tell me who you are?" Hi, I'm Robin Weidner, and I'm an author. I'm working on my 5th book, and I write healing journeys for women, and many, many men read them as well. Many married couples read them, and I'm a life coach certified in trauma. And I come on here every Saturday morning to share. So thank you for being with us for the first time, and thanks for your question. But and hi, Larry. Thanks for saying hi. So we can relate to this bleeding woman in a whole new way, can't we? That we understand what it is to feel this fear of touching. You know, or even, you know, in pictures, people are very careful to take pictures where they are distanced 5-6 feet away from each other, because if you don't, man, the shame might come rolling in. You know, the shame might come because you got closer than 5 foot to somebody. And by the way, I'm not the hugest fan of all that. I kind of had this feeling that our immunity needs some more bacteria coming in. We could talk about that later. But I'm doing my best to stay 5 feet away, but also finding some balance. But anyway, so we relate to this woman because she fell at Jesus' feet, and she is shaking in fear. She is so afraid. Like, what have I done? I was like skin on skin with Jesus, you know. My unclean self, I went and touched him, and she was hesitant to come forward. He had to make it clear he was going to find this person who touched him. And then he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." And I like to think in that moment, for the first time, she felt secure in her own skin. Like, she was like, oh my gosh, I want to cry talking about it because I feel this so deeply. I feel it deep in my gut. I feel just this desire to be touched, and I feel the isolation, and I feel her. And I feel what it is to be somebody who feels like they have a bleeding disorder, you know. If you don't know our story, my husband had a sexual addiction. I had a love addiction. I have all kinds of abandonment, abuse from my past, including abuse as a kid. You know, I had all this going on, and, you know, and it can feel like you have a scarlet letter on you of shame because you have trauma, you know, and people don't want to talk about their trauma because we're afraid of being judged. And this woman had trauma in her body. She had trauma in her soul. She had trauma in her spirit. And there was Jesus saying, be freed of your suffering. You know, be free. It's okay. You touched me and I'm glad you did. And because of that great faith you showed to reach out and touch me and to believe that you could do that, you're free. And man, I think that's what it means to be secure in your own skin. And that's what we're going to talk about today is, you know, in our Pure and Pandemic, we're giving at 1 o'clock. You can find it on my Facebook. You know, you can still sign up. I think we may have 900 people signed up today. You can sign up and take place in that. It's free. But we're going to talk about shame. And how does it, shame is sneaky. How does it sneak into our soul? And why do we give shame the last word so many times? Let's see, Nicoletta. This woman has hurt written all over her life in a number of ways. Let's see if I can get back where I can see you guys, your full things that you're saying. Again, I'm not the greatest technology person, and this is all pretty neat. So bear with me. Let's see. Let's see, this woman has hurt written all over her life in a number of ways. Unstoppable bleeding for 12 years, physical hurt, which there was no cure for, hurting spiritually, which means she was ceremonially unclean, spiritually outcast, deemed too dirty for worship. This woman was hurting socially. Her uncleanliness was contagious, which means she couldn't touch anyone. This woman was hurting financially. She spent all she had. She was trembling in the crowds because she had to stay away from people. Thank you. Thanks for sharing. Yes, all of the above. And I relate to so many of those. And I've felt that just this morning. Those of you who are just coming on, I was in a coaching group and I just didn't know whether to get on because I actually messed up 3 coaching times this week. I had the time wrong. I was in a brain fog. I didn't quite get it. We kept resetting. I kept messing it up. And going into the group led by that man who you know, who I had the coaching time set up with, it was humbling and there was fear in me. And then I realized I cannot let shame have the last word. That I need a love for myself. I need a love for myself that means I'm in my own corner, you know, rooting for me because God's in my corner rooting for me. And as I love myself, in the same way, I love others. You know, if I accept my own brokenness, then I accept yours. Oh, this is, someone just asked, I'm really into the Passion Translation lately, and some people are down on it, but that's not me. Actually, it was translated from the Aramaic. And what he's trying to do is give us the impressions of the Aramaic language. And some people dispute whether that's even important or he had the right to do this. But let me say, I find stuff in there that really is super, it's just a different way of seeing. And I need different ways to see. In fact, I noticed on this one, it's in Mark 12:21, when he said, you must love your neighbor in the same way you love yourself. That word neighbor in the Aramaic is literally your nearest. You must love your nearest in the same way you love yourself. Your nearest, of course, is yourself. Yes, the Passion version. Mine, Bible Gateway says it's the Passion Translation. TPT is what it's called in Bible Gateway. So literally in the Aramaic, love your nearest. Love your nearest. And so in that moment that the woman touched him, that her hand reaching out and touching him was Jesus' nearest. You know, she was nearest Jesus for just an instant. She was nearest to him, and his touch healed her and made her whole. And I like to think now she had a choice to make. She no longer had to give shame the last word. You know, she could choose, because Jesus fought for me, because Jesus pulled me out, shivering, frightened, afraid, vulnerable. He reached out and touched me in that crowd, and he loved me in that moment. That means I am worth love. That means that I was worthy of being healed in my brokenness. And I can imagine her being a person now who is willing to go touch someone unclean, you know. And when she learned that Jesus touched the leopards, I wouldn't be surprised if she went around touching some leopards herself, spreading the good news that Jesus could heal. And, you know, I started looking, you know, an interesting study is look up the word touch or touched and look it up in all the Gospels and look at Jesus touching people. And when he touched people, they were healed. But many times there were not just physical demons that were chasing these folks. There were spiritual demons that were chasing them. And his touch, you know, like it says we were reading from the book Fearfully and Wonderfully Made by Brand and Yancey. You know, again, touch, that our skin ranks highest among the sense organs, even than our eyes or ears. In addition to conveying information about the outside world, skin also perceives emotions. Am I loved and accepted? Is the world secure or hostile? The skin osmotically absorbs that primal assurance. It's amazing, you know, but Jesus helped create the skin, so he knew all this, and he was into touch. So let's go back to the original question that I had today, and that is, are you secure in your own skin? And I think I'm on a learning journey with this still. I mean, I know I wrote this book, Secure in Heart, you know, that's touched so many people. By the way, there are Secure in Heart virtual groups out there right now that are letting people join if you're interested. There are Secure in Heart virtual groups, and I'm going to hang out with some of them. I wrote this book, Secure in Heart, but it was like the beginning of a whole new way of seeing. But still, I get tested here. Still, the accuser is hanging around. Still, shame wants the last word. But I have to be the one to decide. Let's see, Canny. Conscious mind tells me I love myself. Subconscious mind tells me I'm not good enough. Ah, excellent perception. Thank you so much for sharing. Yeah, you know, we've not only got to convince the conscious mind that's like, oh yeah, that's what Christians are supposed to say, that we love ourselves. Yeah, you know, Jesus wants me to love myself. Sure, I love myself. But we have to fight the unconscious, where a lot of our trauma lies. And that's why it's so important to, you know, the pandemic is so triggering. But one blessing it can give us if it is exposing unhealed trauma inside of us and letting it kind of rise up, you know, and letting the emotions attached to it rise up and kind of disseminate through the whole body instead of being trapped in a tight little narrow place inside of us. Allow those emotions, because, you know, that woman who had the bleeding disorder, there were a whole bunch of emotions attached to that. Don't you know that? There was a whole bunch of emotions that she probably thought she didn't have the right to. And that caused her even more shame or self-remorse. But in teaching her, that trauma could come up, and maybe other traumas came up. You know, maybe she'd been mistreated in relationships. Maybe someone left her because she had the bleeding disorder. Maybe she'd been abandoned right and left. You know, who knows what else was there, but now emotions could start to rise up from her, and she didn't have to cut off her head from her body anymore. She could be healed. She could learn what it was to be whole. And I think that's this journey that I've been on, and maybe the journey of the books that I've written. Secure in Heart, those of you who are new to me, Secure in Heart, Eve's Song, Grace Calls, Spiritual, Recovery After Abandonment, Addiction and Abuse, Pure the Journey, and now I'm writing Sarah's Song. These books are all journeys of that, of not giving the accuser the last word. In fact, of even understanding that your most primal wounds, that your wounds are where wisdom resides. Your wounds are where you can heal other people from. Your wounds are where Jesus comes in and touches you, you know, and where you feel most at home with him. So we're about out of time. Wow, it goes so fast. Cindy Lake, that's what I experienced. I just got through Grace Calls and I'm ready to journey through it. Amen, Cindy. You know, I want to end with just a little story from my own life. And let's see, Larry, the world has a vicious cycle to get us not to love ourselves in our own skin. Okay, let me go here, Larry, where I can hopefully see your whole thing. But when you have Jesus in your life, you start to feel comfortable again. Yeah. And what I'm finding is we need to ask Jesus, just like that woman in her own feeble way, she asked Jesus to enter her suffering. You know, she gave him a clue that she needed him to enter her suffering. Anna says, at times childhood traumas can make me feel unclean and not comfortable in my own skin. Your book reminds me of who I am. Thanks, Anna. Yeah, we need to be reminded of who we are. Thank you guys for sharing. So the other night, man, I was in the middle of the night. I don't know if you guys have had this happen, but you know, I couldn't sleep. And all the people we get with that we're trying to help were sitting on my shoulders like rocks, you know, and that's my sin. That's me. That's not anybody else's fault. It's just me thinking I have to carry the world. And I was praying and praying, and I pictured it going through my shoulders and out of my fingertips, and then it would just come right back and sit on my shoulders again, and I couldn't sleep. And so I asked Jesus, can you help me let this go? Can you come and touch this spot that's holding on to this, you know, to what I perceive as pressure? Can you come and touch this spot? And right that moment, I had a picture come into my head. This is in the middle of the night. Maybe it's a little bit of a dream state. I don't know. But I had this picture of me being in the boat when Jesus was with his disciples. And, you know, he's asleep and they're all riled up because there's a storm and they think they're going to die and they're terrified. And no doubt the accuser is there. Like, why aren't they, touching him, you know, right away to get his help? You know, it seems like it's getting pretty bad before they're willing to ask him for help. And so I'm in that boat. And then I heard in my heart, I heard Jesus ask me, where are you in the boat? And in that moment, I had this picture of myself asleep beside Jesus, that he had given me his cushion, and he covered me with this waterproof thing so I wouldn't, the squalls, I wouldn't get wet. And then he tucked a blanket around my ears because I have sensitive ears. They don't like to be cold. You know, I have very sensitive ears. And I had this picture of Jesus, like that I was next to him and I was in this deep sleep and this was disturbing me. And it was such a euphoric moment because I was curled up next to my maker, you know. And remember what we've talked about in the past ones, the wraparound presence of God, the inside out presence of God. What that tells us is there's a sense that God wants to be skin to skin with us. Jesus wants to be skin to skin, not only skin to skin, but inside of our veins, you know, inside of us. It's an inside out God. And in that moment, I felt like I experienced that little bit of that I was beside Jesus in the boat and then when I woke up in the morning, it was like I woke up from being in the boat. And of course, I'm a writer, right? So bear with me. I'm very visual. But and I realized I had slept through the whole storm, and now the boat was on the shore and it was all over, and I had missed the whole thing, which I am quite a sleeper and I can do that. But I think that's what the answer to shame is being skin to skin with Jesus. Is like that woman having the guts to push through our unconscious sense that will never be enough, to push through, our pain and our brokenness, to push through the crowds, whatever's crowding our head and telling us stories that will never be enough, to push through and touch Jesus and let him touch us and feel his touch. And then, my friends, shame no longer has the last word. Thank you so much. That's 40 minutes. And I told my husband 40 minutes max because we need to prepare for today. But again, Pure in Pandemic is today, 1 o'clock Mountain Time, 3 o'clock Eastern. Love to have you join us. Also, I'm accepting clients as a life coach. If anybody needs help with spiritual recovery, creative recovery, trauma recovery, that's there. But love you guys, and thanks for joining me today.